Welcome to the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. I am Dr. Christopher Manente, and I will be your host and moderator of what I know is sure to be a very compelling panel. When I'm not moderating panel discussions, I serve as the founding executive director of the Rutgers Center for Adult Autism Services and also clinical faculty at the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey. So today's panel is going to focus on issues related to employment for individuals who identify as being neurodiverse. For too long, the opportunity for meaningful competitive employment in inclusive environments has been reserved exclusively for neurotypical people in our society. While the majority of adults with neurodifferences have historically been under or unemployed, recent data demonstrates that adults with autism in particular have particularly low rates of employment nationwide, with some estimates suggesting that only around 20% of people on the spectrum achieve some form of competitive employment. We are fortunate to have three excellent panelists here today to discuss how the philosophical framework of neurodiversity can be used as the basis for transforming the modern workplace into an environment where the unique talents of individuals with cognitive or neurological differences can flourish. So just briefly, neurodiversity refers to a perspective that there exists a human spectrum of functioning, where all individuals exist on a continuum of ability, and a focus on any one individual's deficits or what they cannot do becomes irrelevant. It's really a commitment to focus on abilities and celebrating everyone's unique differences and the value that they can add if only given the opportunities to do so. So now I'd love to briefly introduce our panelists. First, we have Ludmila Preslova, who's the Director of Research and Professor of Psychology at Vanguard University of Southern California. Next, we have Jose Velasco, who's the Chief Program Manager at SAP Product Engineering, SAP Autism at Work Ambassador. And last, but certainly not least, we have Rajesh Anandan, CEO and founder of Ultranauts Incorporated. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
So first, I would like each of you to respond to a general prompt about the concept and framework of neurodiversity and how that impacts the work that you do for people with neurodifferences. Ludmila, would you like to begin?
Sure. The concept of neurodiversity is something that's become very popular recently, but it actually originates from late 90s with the work of Judy Singer. And then more and more society is becoming aware that it's a different form of diversity, just like there's biodiversity in the world with a variety of plant and animal life. Within human society, there is a diversity of neurological functioning. Some people are attuned to environment to the point that they can hear every small whisper. Some people are able to very quickly systematize and draw patterns from the environment. Other people tend to be exceptionally brave and risk-taking. So as a humanity, diversity is a characteristic of our large group. But society has been designed to work better only for some subtypes within this diversity. So now we're talking about how do we make society work for people of different neurotypes.
Wonderful, thank you. Jose, could you tell us a little bit about how the concept of neurodiversity informs the work that you do at SAP?
I think it's a different change of perspective. I think what neurodiversity does for us is changes the dialogue from the in spite of to the because of. History has taught us that there's a significant number out there of individuals who are neurodiverse, in our case, through our program in the autism spectrum, that have skills and abilities that are obviously the same as everybody else, but also there's going to be a set of characteristics, a set of skills and abilities that are frankly attributable to people who are neurodiverse, who may not be found in individuals who are neurotypical. I believe that there is a significant set of values and contribution that individuals in the spectrum bring to our organizations. Our program, as you know, is 7 years old, and reaching that stage where it's becoming part of the norm in the company. And the value that we see, again, in bringing individuals who are neurodiverse continues to increase year over year. Overall, I think that, as you said, Chris, this is in Ludmila, the first. This is one of the topics that is more nascent in the space of diversity and inclusion. Is what some people have called before the new frontier, the space of neurodiversity.
Wonderful, thank you. And Rajesh, how do you feel about neurodiversity, and how does that inform the work that you do at Ultranauts?
So, Chris, first I have to say it's great to be on this panel, and Jose has done so much great work in leading the efforts at SAP, and really as SAP is one of the first large company to make a very bold commitment around neurodiversity and hiring autistic talent in particular, but broadening that over time. And Ludmila, who I don't know as well, but I have to say I stalk her writings on LinkedIn. And if you guys who are watching don't follow her, please do, because she posts extremely insightful and at times courageous articles, just making the case for a very different way to think about inclusion. At Ultranauts, we've been around for 7 years, and my co-founder and I started the company with a simple mission to demonstrate that neurodiversity could be a competitive advantage for business. And our theory of change was even simpler, which was to build a world-class, commercially viable business that could scale and compete on even terms, powered by a neurodiverse team. And the reality of how that's unfolded has been that we've learned a lot along the way. We now are a team that is fully virtual, and we have been from day one. Everyone works from home. We have teammates spread out in 25 states across the US and a couple of Canadian provinces. And 3/4 of our team are neurominorities. And the diversity of our team extends far beyond one dimension. We just did a survey of our team at the end of the year, and maybe 38% of the team are cisgender male, 40% of the team are cisgender female, 20%, 22% of the team are trans, non-binary, metagender, agender. So whether it's around neurotype or gender identity or race or ethnicity, we embrace diversity in all its forms because we believe that it leads to cognitive diversity. When you're able to bring together different brain types, different information processing models, different points of view, different worldviews, there's a fair bit of evidence that shows that you can solve more complex problems. You could surface more unique insights, and you can drive continuous improvement, which for us, through our lens of the quality of software, data, machine learning, stuff that's being built, allows us to just do better. We've been growing at 50% a year. This year, despite COVID, or last year, we grew at 60 or 70% a year. And that's powered by the team that we've been able to assemble and the sort of universal workplace that we are creating that empowers everyone on the team to contribute and use their strengths and create value for the work we do.
That is truly incredible. Thank you for sharing that amazing kind of story and design of your organization. So that actually leads to, I think, an interesting concept worth exploring. In that, why do you think that there aren't more companies and organizations that are seeking to be as inclusive and achieve the levels of diversity, which frankly, I mean, obviously, Ultranauts is in some rarefied air in terms of, the diversity and representation that you guys have in the organization. But I'm thinking that some hiring managers or some, heads of companies might hear some of that, and whether they're aware of it or not, there might be some chatter in the back of their mind saying, like, "Ooh, sounds like that might be difficult in terms of like organizational culture, or like getting people to get along, or like, wow, like that might be a whole lot of extra work." Right? When you have all of these people coming from, and certainly like a timely kind of concept given the state of our society, right, in the world, where people with differences really struggle to see each other's perspective. So would any of the three of you, Rajesh, you as well, like if you want to jump back in, speak to like some of the organizational characteristics that are crucial, like to achieving great outcomes when you have this level of diversity?
I can say one thing to start and defer to Jose and Ludmila, but humans are creatures of habit, and when we are familiar with something or a group or a way of doing things, we get stuck on it. There's been quite a bit of research done on the efficacy of different recruiting techniques. For example, there's a meta-analysis done in the late 90s and then repeated a few different times. And the reality is that the common tools in the recruiter's toolbox, a resume review and an interview, are not particularly effective, right? So in one study, they looked at the correlation between, let's say, years of work experience and on-the-job performance. It has an R-squared of 0.03. Basically, there's no correlation. You might as well just not do it. Similarly with unstructured job interviews, slightly better R-squared of like 0.16, but it's pretty much useless. And yet these are the standard tools that are used, even though they are useless. So this is not about inclusive hiring, it's just about effective hiring. Because the cost to bring on a new employee, onboard them, train them up to be able to be productive, and then have them actually not be able to do the job, just makes no sense. So I think, and that's the easiest one to point at, because it's absurd that people still hire this way. It's not effective, right? So, and Jose can share how SAP hires, and we can share how we do it at Ultranauts. It's not hard. Use job tests. Be objective. If you do interviews, do structured interviews with a scoring rubric. And really, there's no way around needing to actually be able to observe or assess the actual work someone does. And I'll just say one thing on this, which is people think you could do that for technical roles, engineers or developers. You could look at their GitHub repo. You could do that for everyone. I mean, we hired a head of sales, and the candidates had to do job tests, because surely if you're in sales, you can be convincing in an interview, but that says nothing about how well you might be able to strategically analyze a market opportunity, or how quickly you can network your way into a decision maker. You could test those things. You can give people an assignment. And I'll just end it saying it gets much more interesting and nuanced when you start to look at what needs to happen after someone joins. I think the stuff around talent sourcing and acquisition, these are no-brainers. I mean, the evidence is there. What you need to do is obvious. You just need to do it. And unfortunately, as humans and as organizations, there's a lot of inertia.
Jose?
I think that you hit it spot on, Rajesh. There are some things that we continue to do as industry, as labor market, that I believe that there's two things that we look at. One is effectiveness, and the other one is efficiency. And I think that systems have been designed for efficiency, not for effectiveness. In other words, the fact that we hire people that don't fit the mold or the system or the company or whatever, after we hire them, tells us that we were very fast at probably bringing them in, but not really great at really mapping their capabilities to what the company actually needs. One of the things that we learned through the Autism at Work program is something that I think that some people would tell me, we would never do something like that. And that is to give somebody the questions that of an interview, or the topics, the themes of what's going to happen during the interview. The topics are going to be discussed ahead of time. Okay. When was the last time that any of us received an email from a potential manager or interviewing entity in a company telling us these are the 10 topics that we're going to be addressing so that you can prepare, or these are the questions? What we discovered when we introduced some of these techniques through in the Autism at Work program, number one, it was a much more relaxed discussion. It was well bounded. The manager came better prepared. The individual came also better prepared, and we have a common topic to discuss. Of course, that's not something that we do in a traditional interview. Again, none of us probably have ever had that an opportunity to have that experience in an interview process. The other thing is that, in my opinion, it reflects a lot more, Rajesh, as to your point, on what really happens in the enterprise after you're hired. If somebody gives you the topics ahead of time and you come and have the interview and you discuss them, I think that's a better way to get to know the person in a more natural environment. I ask you guys the question: when was the last time that you went into a meeting, working with other people, and somebody asked you a random surprise question to see how you answered that question? Typically, the environments in which we work are collaborative. People send you a meeting request. They tell you what are the topics that you're going to be addressing. You may have the ability to ask questions before the meeting when you're collaborating with people as to what topics you're going to be talking about. Even some people may send you some pre-read materials. So I think in terms of the future of the interview process of being one where people have an ability to receive those topics ahead of time, and where you have ample time to prepare basically on the topics, again, that are going to be discussed. And some of the questions that you will be asked are going to be, how do you arrive at that conclusion? What sources did you consult? How did you optimize your response, et cetera, et cetera? That will give me a much more clearer view as to, what is your train of thought? How do you problem solve, et cetera, et cetera? So why am I saying this? Because some of these techniques we incorporated into our interview process as a way to facilitate the process for both the manager, for the individual, and have a more effective, not so much an efficient, but effective interview process.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jose. So Ludmila, do you have anything to add on the topic of what does an inclusive workplace look like? What are those characteristics?
Those were absolutely brilliant answers. And yes, inertia and using outdated and inefficient and ineffective instruments to select people is definitely a major part that feeds into difficulties with neurodiverse and diverse employment in general. And if we look at organizations overall, there's this concept of fit that sometimes I think is misused and misunderstood, in that we're looking for culture fit, which turns to be very procrastinating. It's just, okay, there's a box and you have to fit within the box, which definitely hurts organizations. I come originally from global diversity, so the largest view of cultures and human differences. And then I kind of started looking at different types of diversity, including neurodiversity. And in global diversity, it's very typical to talk about culture add, and we're talking about it more and more in domestic applications. So in general, I think we need to start thinking about add rather than fit when it comes to talents, when it comes to perspectives, because that is another thing that we've been missing. We're looking for something that we've had maybe for the last 30 years, and we're trying to find people who are going to fit the same mold, but it's not necessarily what we need now. It's not even necessarily what's being best the entire time. It's not necessarily what we need going forward. So what kind of strength and talents and perspectives do we want to add so that we go forward stronger than before? So that's one way that I think about it, the importance of fit versus add. And another way is we know that we talk about selection a lot because it's a major barrier for neurodiverse employment. But then there are other barriers: how our training is designed, how our organizational functions are designed, the workplace, promotion system. So a lot of this work really fits within the a larger topic of creating inclusive organizational design. So that's what a lot of my writing is about, creating organizations that really work for a variety of humanity. Just as we don't say forget your culture when we're doing hiring within global diversity, we can't tell people forget who you are in order to fit within our organizations. We need to create flexible organizations that work for a variety of people and that also allow us to bring in talent and strength and add all those different variables that will help us to be stronger going forward. And that's really the way I think that will help a lot of organizations think about it later. Just creating organizations that work for people of different ages and different cultural groups, as well as neurodiverse people.
And that's the crux of the work to be done for us all, because I think we've arrived at a point in time where there's a recognition that point solutions don't work. Constructing a separate standalone process or system or effort for one group over another might be important to get things started. But in order for these efforts to be sustained and certainly to scale, we need to think more broadly. And so at Ultranauts, we call that designing a universal workplace, simply applying universal design principles to the workplace. And for us, that means a few things. And it has sort of 4 dimensions. One is flexibility. And what that means for us is not just do we all work from home so you can work in an environment you've designed for yourself versus being forced to sit all day in an environment that wasn't designed with you in mind. And that's hard to do in an office environment, but possible, right? And certainly companies like SAP have done a lot there. But flexibility goes far beyond that. So we've thrown out the notion of an FTE, a full-time equivalent, because it turns out there's really no evidence that humans are optimally productive for 40 or 50 hours a week. It's not there. And yet we just all embrace this norm of this is how it has to be. And so we offer for most of our roles, which are salaried, teammates can choose if they want sort of a quote full-time or 100% role, a 3/4 time role, or a half-time role. Salaries are prorated, but this means that if we have a teammate who's super productive for half the sort of typical work week, they could still have a salaried role and have income stability, and more importantly, be able to contribute to the team and progress in their career. The second dimension is transparency, because when you bring people together who are very different, coming from different backgrounds, different experiences, maybe some have never worked before, maybe some process information very differently, having complete transparency around how decisions are made and how things happen, why things happen, is really important. An example of that is at Ultranauts, the kind of performance dashboard the leadership team uses, there's about 40 KPIs, is published to the whole team. So everybody in the company is looking at the same metrics that the leadership team is using. When we meet once a week, the notes are published. So nobody needs to wonder, like, what is the leadership team talking about? So that you know what's going on. A third dimension is just focusing, a real focus on well-being. because you have to assume that you will have teammates who are struggling or need help. You have to assume that mental health is a priority. You can't ignore that or just imagine that, oh, it just affects a few people. And so if we're designing for a team where we know that we're going to have teammates maybe with generalized anxiety disorder or workplace PTSD, we've got to then architect a system that works for that sort of end user, if you would. You have to design a system for extreme use so that it works for everyone. And then the final piece, and I'll stop here because I'm blabbering, is to take the concept of inclusion, unpack it, and design it into your core work systems and practices. And so 2 examples of that I'll share. One is we're an engineering firm, so we use Agile and Scrum for all our projects. Very organically on one of our projects, a sort of adaptation of Agile emerged because it turns out the way Agile is practiced, if you're strict about it, and we're strict about things, actually doesn't work. It doesn't work if you, let's say, have selective mutism and you don't speak. It doesn't work if you have auditory challenges and you can't actually follow what's happening in a daily stand-up. It doesn't work if you process information more deliberately and you're not able to respond in real time, like Jose mentioned in an interview. Same goes in the workplace, right? So we've adapted it and we just published a paper called Inclusive Agile, because there's a way to change and tweak your core processes so it works for everyone. And again, of course, the stuff we're doing makes it possible for our autistic colleagues to contribute fully and really participate, but it makes work better for everyone, which is the thing we're all trying to do.
If I may add something to that, Rajesh, I think that what you guys did with Agile, which is to basically create a version that is friendly for folks that are neurodiverse, we did exactly that in the space of design thinking. Design thinking is a methodology that we use at SAP, and well, many other companies use it as well to innovate. But the challenge with the methodology is that it was so abstract and so open to interpretation, and it was not something that was tangible, maybe step and task oriented enough for somebody who needs more concrete set of activities to think. So we took that standard, we modified it, and we deployed it in our what we call our Enterprise Readiness Academy, which is our 6 weeks pre-employment training program for our candidates who are on the autism spectrum. And we saw great results with that. And the good thing also is that it makes us think how many other people in the company would feel more comfortable with something that is more structured like this methodology that, I mean, we didn't invent it, we extended it, we enhanced it so that it could be more consumable by somebody who's neurodiverse. And there are so many areas, I think, in a company that we need to ask ourselves those questions. It worked great for folks that are neurodiverse. Is this really the best way forward for everybody as well?
Yeah, these are all excellent points. And Rajesh, in particular, I love how you clearly articulate, right, that this can only work if it's not something that an organization just kind of does, right, out of charity or like it's a project. Like it's not something you do. It has to be part of who you are. Right, it has to be embedded into the culture of the organization and like kind of supported by a fundamental belief that the organization is better for it, right? And so I think it's just such an inspiration, right, that Ultranauts has been kind of founded with that mindset, right? And it has kind of evolved and grown with that perspective. So I think alternatively, Jose, I'd love to hear from you about like from the perspective of a larger organization, right, that wasn't necessarily founded, with those incredibly strong commitments and ideals to this level of neurodiversity, and maybe what some of the challenges have been to try and get the organization on board with this as a cultural shift, right, and something that benefits everyone at the organization, is not just for this subset of the population who needs our help. Because like I hear you saying that the leadership at SAP has this realization that like, wow, like maybe a lot of our employees would prefer this approach and benefit from it. And that's when this really works, right? And again, going back to Rajesh's universal design, right? It's like, people who are neurodiverse are people, right? And organizations should be adopting practices and cultural perspectives that are good for all of the people who work there, not just some subset of people, because of course that perpetuates an us and them kind of segregative mentality. So Jose, if you could speak to some of the trials and tribulations that you may have experienced in moving SAP forward in this respect.
Absolutely. I think that what we see is that there's companies like the Ultranauts who are what we would say is they're a greenfield approach, basically companies that are small, that have the ability to bake in all of these practices by design as the company is being created and it grows. In larger companies, it's not like that. It's a retrofit job. Okay, so basically we take the practices and we have the processes that are in the company. And what we need to do is how do we bake into these processes that are already existing, that are basically economies of scale processes, that level of personalization that is needed in order to tend to the needs, in this case, of neurodiverse individuals. So in those processes, I mean, we start with sourcing and screening and pre-employment training, then the onboarding process, and lastly, the sustainability. We have to take a step back and look at where is it that we need to make the necessary adaptations. We did those adaptations, by the way, in what we call a program level apparatus, which means that there were a small group of people that were part of this program called Autism at Work, creating these practices. And then what we needed to do was to lift and shift these practices from a program level to the enterprise process. Okay, and those are things that take time in companies like ours with 100,000 employees. Obviously doable, right? But you need to have a dedicated effort to do this. Chris, one of the things that is super important is to have the top-down management of the company that buys into this process, and also the bottom-up, which is the grassroots of the organization, the people that are enthusiastic. If you have those two, you have the ability to transform the organization. And to your point, and Rajesh's earlier point, these things can be things that are interpreted or seen as just a diversity and inclusion effort. They need to be really considered a business transformation effort. Okay, the moment that we start looking at as a business transformation effort, and we allow ourselves the time to change the processes, not overnight, but say we have a roadmap for change, that it may take 2 or 3 or 4 years. That's, in my opinion, the way to do it. We have to be patient about this. Again, top management buy-in, grassroots support from the organization, and know that what we're doing is basically doing a retrofit job in an existing set of processes, where other companies like Rajesh's, in a very mindful way from the very beginning, had a great opportunity to design their organization in a way that these practices are baked in.
That's incredible. Yeah. And to understand the distinctions there and how best to go about it. And Jose, your suggestion about a good place to start being having excellent, top-down kind of buy-in to this leads us right into, the final question that I have for each of you. And that is, it's kind of a two-part question. Part one is, how do we get more, companies and organizations invested in pursuing this level of diversity, in particular for individuals that are neurodiverse, and what are some actionable items that either existing organizations of a variety of sizes or new organizations looking to get started can have from each of you, that in terms of advice as to how they could successfully accomplish this. And Ludmila, if you'd like to start us off, that'd be great.
Sure. So if we're talking about bringing more companies on board with this wonderful work, that's Rajesh and Jose were talking about, and many other companies, specifically in tech, are doing, but we need many more companies to embrace. We really need to help a larger number of managers, leaders within organizations to understand this particular perspective. So education is one important part of this. One thing that we designed within our master's program in industrial organizational psychology is that all of our students will come out with understanding of diversity that includes disability, neurodiversity, and understanding of inclusive organizational design. So when they go into organizations, they're able to educate others, whether they are in the human resources or in training and development or on the C-level. We need to get this message out through training more people who are going to be in a variety of organizational development, organizational psychology, consulting, human resources, leadership, that will be able to spread the word across a variety of companies, as well as promoting the great examples that we've been talking about here today. So trying to spread the word to larger groups of people and really making this mainstream through education. So that's one thing that we're doing on our side. But for companies that are just kind of unsure, they don't want to maybe jump into it, it's just diversity. It just as you're saying, well, I don't know how to do this type of diversity, but I'm going to meet different people, and eventually I I might make a mistake in one conversation, then I'm going to learn, and then we're going to do it better. It's the same thing. You don't need to panic. You don't need to be scared. It's just a different type of diversity. And once you get to know more people who come from a variety of backgrounds, including various neuro-minority backgrounds, you're going to see how it works and how it fits. And it's just a different type of diversity. Don't make yourself so scared you're not willing to try.
That's a wonderful message, because I do think that sometimes fear does drive the reservations that many organizations or hiring managers may have in onboarding neurodiverse people. Jose?
I think that the first step is to get involved in events like this one, okay, and to inform yourself, as Ludmila was saying, educate yourself. And if you are an individual who is not necessarily in upper management in a company and you have the drive to create a program, it's entirely possible for you to go and speak to your diversity and inclusion department or your senior management in the organization. Said it would be great to have a guest speaker, somebody who comes with experience to talk about neurodiversity in the workplace. We have seen many companies that start with that very small step. And then they form a group of, again, grassroots of employees who are interested in this topic, who then request the participation of an executive, in that way finding an executive champion. And that's how things actually get started. The conversation starts shaping up, and then people start looking at how do we structure a program, who are the entities that can support us, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not really that difficult. There's plenty of companies out there that are willing to talk to you. Of course, we have us at SAP, but there's also Microsoft, the Altronauts. We have Ernst & Young, JP Morgan Chase. I mean, there's a variety of companies out there that are implementing programs, all of them with a slightly different spin on how their implementations work. But there's enough experience out there being built for you to go out, reach out to those companies and say, hey, how are you doing this? Can you walk me through the process? And again, those are the very first steps. I think it's much easier than 8-10 years ago to start a program like this, because there's software out there. There's an ecosystem. That's the word that I was looking for. There's an ecosystem of support. There's an ecosystem of facilitators, of assets. There's government also involved in this in the form of vocational rehabilitation. So again, it's not very difficult to get a pilot program started. I encourage everybody here listening to reach out to those companies who have implemented and learn from them and try to get a pilot program started.
Wonderful. And Rajesh, you have the last word, my friend.
Well, I would just say, given the world we are living in, any company that wants to thrive or really survive needs to be very deliberate about building teams that have cognitive diversity. There's no way to evolve as a business and navigate through the sort of unpredictable, volatile, and sort of complex times we're living in without that cognitive diversity, and thinking about neurodiversity as a beachhead to building that sort of diversity of thought on your team, and having different brain types makes a lot of sense. There's 1 to 2% of the population is on the autism spectrum. Something like 15% of the population are neurominorities, and that definition is broadening and includes more people. So there's a massive pool. There are pools of talent out there that you're missing out on, and without it, I personally just have a hard time seeing how any company can be successful. And then once you've gotten over that realization that you need this on your team, in your organization, then, as Jose was pointing out, we're almost a decade in to this journey, particularly in terms of programs like SAPs and many other large companies and startups like Ultranauts. So there are roadmaps and blueprints and an ecosystem, as Jose was saying. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a starting point. I would say the most important thing is to recognize that you have allies. If you're a reasonable sized organization, chances are in your employee base, you have colleagues who are neurominorities. They may feel uncomfortable disclosing because of fear of stigma, which is very real. But the more you could signal to the organization that you are embracing neurodiversity, the more likely it is that the colleagues you already have who are neurominorities might come forward. And then, of course, you're going to have employee resource groups and other groups that might have maybe they're not autistic or neurominority, maybe they are parents, but you have allies, and start with those allies. Find a small group, a business unit, a functional team where you have real champions, and start there and prove that you could make something work. And then you can look at how you replicate.
Amazing. Yeah. And that kind of echoes and amplifies Jose's earlier point on, working from both top down, right, and bottom up, and kind of getting that grassroots type of motion through an organization. So I think this is a good place to end. I want to thank our 3 incredible panelists who certainly didn't disappoint. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us today for this panel titled Unique Talent, Neurodiversity in the Modern Workplace. This has been part of the Non-Obvious Beyond Diversity Summit. Thank you for watching. I hope that you'll all check out all the other topics that we're covering, because we brought together voices from all genres, genders, and geographies as a part of this summit. For more fascinating conversations like this, you can visit www.nonobviousdiversity.com. Also, our official summit hashtag is #NonObviousDiversity. Thanks for joining us. I'm Christopher Menente, and remember to always stay non-obvious.